What's going on, YouTube? This is SG1 Sports, and you're watching our college football channel. We are kicking off our 2023 schedule preview and projected record series here with the defending champs, the Georgia Bulldogs, of course, back-to-back national champions. And so what we'll do is we'll go through each team, we'll show you the schedule, and then we will give you a very early projected record just based off of the schedule and how tough the schedule is, and roughly how good we think each team is going to be. This is not a prediction. This is simply just a projection based off of how tough that schedule is. So let's start with the schedule for Georgia in 2023. Here was the schedule from 2022. You see Georgia winning all their games, 12-0 in the regular season, then of course winning the SEC, winning their two playoff games, 15-0. You look back at that schedule, they had that big non-conference game against Oregon. That turned out to be a game that wasn't close at all. You look at what they did to Oregon and then what they did to TCU. Look at how they started and finished the season. Just incredible wins. Very impressive in both of those games. They played Georgia Tech, of course, they always play them, but really no one else in the non-conference. You look at who they played out of the West. They played Auburn at home, and then they played on the road at Mississippi State. Neither one of those games really all that tough. And so it was a schedule that turned out to be respectable, but it wasn't really that bad last year with Auburn struggling, Mississippi State. They were a solid team, but it wasn't like playing Alabama or LSU. So let's look ahead to 2023, and we'll first take a look at who Georgia plays outside of the division. Of course, they're going to play every game in the SEC East. And you see they'll play UT Martin, Ball State, UAB, and on the road at Georgia Tech. Not exactly a murderer's row there. No big non-conference game this year. Now, give Georgia credit, though. They've got a lot of big games coming up in the future. It just so happened that this year, no big non-conference game. Georgia Tech will be their toughest non-conference game, unless maybe it's UAB. UAB is definitely a respectable group of five team, one of the better group of five teams, but really not in the same league as Georgia. That game should not be close. So yes, not a challenge here in the non-conference. UT Martin, Ball State, and UAB, and then of course Georgia Tech. Who do they play out of the West? Well, they'll play on the road at Auburn. Tough place to play, but we really don't know much about how good they're going to be with Hugh Freeze. And then they'll play Ole Miss at home. Going to be a tough offense to stop with the Rebels, Lane Kiffin, of course, but still Georgia should be a pretty big favorite in that game. So let's look at the entire schedule now. They will open up the season with UT Martin, and then after that, Ball State. So that's how they get things started this year. No big game against Oregon this year. UT Martin to kick it off, and then Ball State. Then they will get into SEC play. They always play South Carolina early in the year. Seems like it's usually in that week 3 spot, sometimes week 2 maybe. But yeah, they'll play South Carolina again early in the year, September 16th. That'll be a home game for Georgia. The Gamecocks are their program is getting better. They're getting more competitive, but playing in Athens, it's hard to imagine Georgia not winning that game. And then they'll play UAB right after that, so they'll play their 3 easier non-conference games all in the month of September. And then you look at the final game in the month of September. It's on the road at Auburn, and again, Auburn, we really don't know how good they're going to be, but that might actually be the second hardest game on their schedule because it is on the road. It's a rivalry game. And again, Auburn might wind up being a top 25 team this year. Maybe they're not, but still, you look at the rest of the schedule, it's a really nice schedule. It kind of reminds me of the Michigan schedule from last year. But yes, Auburn right there on the road. Maybe a little bit of a tough game, but probably not. Georgia still should have a clear advantage in that game. And then they go into the month of October where they get Kentucky at home. Kentucky played Georgia pretty tough last year, but this time it's back in Athens. Then after that, it's a tough road environment on the road at Vanderbilt. Yes, Vanderbilt. Now, again, this schedule just sets up really well. When Vanderbilt is on the road, Florida is considered a road game, even though it's a neutral site game. That's who they'll play next. They'll get a bye week before playing Florida. You just don't really see Florida being able to compete in that game. Although it is a rivalry, you never know. Missouri after that on November the 4th, a home game for Georgia after the close game last year. I think they'll be focused in on this one. And then they'll play Ole Miss. So an interesting end of the season here with Ole Miss and Tennessee before Georgia Tech. They don't get a non-conference game there late in the season because they play Georgia Tech. So Ole Miss could be a bit of a tricky matchup right before a road game at Tennessee, but it is a home game, and so you would expect Georgia to come out ready for that one. But then there's the game on the road at Tennessee, probably the toughest game on the schedule. If Tennessee is as good as I think most people expect them to be. Tough place to play on the road late in the season, right after having to go up against a high-powered Ole Miss offense, right before a rivalry game against Georgia Tech. Tennessee there on the road could be the game that trips them up. If they're going to lose a game, it'll probably be that game to Tennessee. And then Georgia Tech, again, they'll close it out playing them on the road. So you look at this schedule, again, not that tough. And also just looking at the road games, the true road games. It's Auburn, Vanderbilt, and Tennessee, at least in the SEC. Auburn, Vanderbilt, and Tennessee. Those are their 3 road games in the SEC. Florida is considered a road game, even though it's going to be in Jacksonville, of course, neutral site game there. So there's really just not that. There's not many tests here for Georgia. Tennessee probably the only game that I think anyone is really going to, there will be people out there saying, yeah, Tennessee's going to upset Georgia. They get them in Knoxville. That's an upset alert game for sure. But other than that, is anyone going to go out on a limb and pick Auburn to beat Georgia, or Florida to beat Georgia, or Ole Miss to beat Georgia? Probably not. So it really comes down to that Tennessee game. And even if they lose it, if Tennessee loses a couple of other games, Georgia could still be going to Atlanta in the SEC championship. But it looks like 11-1, 12-0, almost a guarantee for Georgia once again this year with a very, very easy schedule. Here were the projections from last year. Of course, Georgia was 12-0, and we're just looking at the regular season here in this video. They were 12-0. Our projection had them at 11-1, favored in every game, but just because of the schedule, had them potentially losing one game. But my personal prediction was 12-0. I did have Georgia going undefeated. I had them losing to Alabama in the SEC championship. Of course, Alabama didn't even make it. But yeah, 12-0 is my prediction. The FBI projection was 11.6 and 1.3. Now that would include the SEC championship game. So they had them, roughly 11-1, or possibly 12-1 with a loss in the SEC championship, or 12-1, I guess, because they had them almost guaranteed to go to the SEC championship. So if you count that, 12-1. So either 12-0 or 11-1 in the regular season. The over/under was actually at 10.5, which seems like really, really easy money. But Alabama was also at 10.5, and I think you would have thought that was easy money as well, and it was not. Remember, Alabama did lose 2 games, so that's why you got to watch it when you're making these, when you're going against that over/under win total. But 10.5 was the win total there, and they easily surpassed that. So here's the schedule again for 2023. Not that tough of a schedule. We'll see what the projection here is. This is the scale that we use. If the game, I think, is less than 20%, it's in red. Over 80%, it's in green. And then we've got 20 to 29%, 71 to 80%. Those are games where I think the spread will be double digits. 30 to 39 and 61 to 70. Those percentages are games where I think the spread will be around a touchdown, 6, 7, 8, 9 points. And then if it's going to stay in the white here, 40 to 60%, that's a game where I think the spread will be 5 or less, pretty much. So that's kind of the scale that we use here, just going off of how good we think these teams are going to be. Obviously, it's early, and the rosters are still evolving for a lot of these teams, but this is just kind of grouping the teams into different categories and giving you a rough projection. So we'll start with the easy wins, the green games. We got UT Martin, Ball State, UAB, and Vanderbilt. And I mean, honestly, you might could put some more games in the green. The way I'm doing it this year, if it's blue or green, though, those are considered wins, and then we'll average out the other games. But yeah, Vanderbilt, probably the easiest win in the SEC. I mean, you could make an argument that Kentucky should be in the green, Missouri should be in the green, Georgia Tech should be in the green. You could definitely make that argument. I don't know. But again, blue is double digits. So green, we're talking about games where the spread's going to be like 20 or more. So yeah, some of these other games that might be that high. But Georgia does have a new quarterback this year, and there are some question marks. They're still obviously super talented, maybe the most talented roster once again this year. But yeah, I think those 4 games, you can consider those to be pretty much automatic blowouts. Then we'll go to the games in blue, and this is almost the rest of the schedule here. These are games where, I think the spreads will be 10 to 20 points, somewhere in that range. South Carolina on the road at Auburn could be a little tricky just because it's a road game, rivalry, and we don't really know too much about Auburn right now with the new coach. Kentucky is there. Florida, you feel like, again, I know it's a rivalry and everything, but Georgia should be favored by double digits again there. Missouri, same thing. Ole Miss, Georgia Tech. It's just hard to imagine Georgia losing any of these games. If there was going to be a game, I think it would probably be that Auburn game just because it's on the road, and Auburn could turn out to be a really good team. Like I said, it's very hard to say that this early on, but that would be probably the biggest test out of these games in the blue. South Carolina might be the best team that they play out of these teams, but they get that one at home, so I feel pretty confident there. But like I said, I think the spread will be double digits for all of these games, and so we're just going to go ahead and count all of those as wins. And then you've got the game against Tennessee. Was kind of back and forth on where this game should wind up, but I think it's safe to put this one in the purple. I think Georgia will be favored by about a touchdown. I would just guess maybe an 8-point favorite in that game. It's late in the season. It's on the road. I'm expecting Tennessee to be a top 10, at least top 15 team again this year. So that will be a tough game. But remember, last year we thought it was going to be a good game, and Georgia blew them out. So I think Georgia will be favored there, like I said, by about a touchdown. And that's the only game that I could see them really potentially losing. If there was another game, like I said, it might be that Auburn game. But I think they'll be favored by a lot in that one. So you average this all out, and it's going to put them over 11.5 wins because, again, we're counting the blue and green games as wins, and that means that you're going to round that up to 12-0. So a 12-0 projection for Georgia. If Tennessee was a 50-50 game, then the projection would be right there at 11-1, but went ahead and put that one in the purple, so that's why I think the projection, a very fair projection here for Georgia, given the schedule, is 12-0 in 2023.